Oh, Tutu, tell me where the people going today. Oh, Tutu, tell me where the people going today. They go down Makua, bring more tupu and pray. They going down Makua, bring more tupu and pray. Oh, Tutu, please, can you tell me how to go? Oh, Tutu, please, can you tell me how to go? Take my hand and follow.
Aloha, I'm Karen Young, your host for this update on Makua Valley. In 1998, Earth Justice, on behalf of Malama Makua, sued the U.S. Army to do an environmental study on the impacts of the military training on endangered species, plants and animals, as well as the surrounding community, the air, land, and sea. I think we've reached a historic point in that struggle, and today we have as our guests Sparky Rodriguez, who is the president of Malama Makua, and Dr. Fred Dodge, who is the treasurer for Malama Makua. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I thought we'd start first for the viewers about some background history of Makua Valley. And I wonder if Fred maybe would start since you have the photo.
Yes. History of Makua goes back to, as has been said, to a place in Makua that has a number of emu rings. And we have a slide for that. Those emu rings showed up when the Army bulldozed the area, and there's a story behind that, that they were supposed to have an archaeologist there at the time, but the archaeologist came late. Nevertheless, he recognized these charcoal, ash-laden black marks in rings. And on that slide, towards the bottom, it's faint, but there is a ring of a former emu. And the good thing about that is that they could be carbon dated, and they were done so. And several of them came out with a range of between 1290 to 1350. So we know for sure Hawaiians have been there since the 14th century, and very likely it's been a lot longer than that.
Well, my wife, Leandra, says that it's 800 BC, before Cook. So it gives you an idea how many centuries before the islands were invaded or discovered by others outside of the Hawaiian community. And some of the things that I've seen in the sites of Waianae is that Ohikilolo was the center of government for Hawaii. And in Makua is where the ali'i raised their children. So before the road was put in for the railroad, or actually where Makua Cave is, that came all the way out. So that valley was basically secluded and isolated from the rest of the island. And only access through Wailua, which is Kauai Hapai, and that's kind of a related Aupua on the other side of the island, as well as ocean. And you could walk around, but the ocean was one of the accesses. So the ali'i lived there. So 800 BC or 14th century, it's been used and occupied. And I think also in one of the assessment maps from the royalty said that Makua had a thriving and very valuable ocean resources.
Yeah.
Do you have an idea of the population or what they did, how they lived?
Well, you know, the emus are earthen ovens, underground ovens, basically. And they can feed a lot of people. So estimates vary. I don't know what you've heard, Sparky, but I've heard anywhere between 800 to 2,000 people live there. So it was quite well populated, and apparently was a fairly fertile valley. And as Sparky has mentioned, the ocean as their icebox was full.
Well, one thing that the archaeologists shared about the carbon dating in the emu was that the wood that they used was a'ali'i. And for us, it's al kiavi, but back then, if you can imagine a dryland forest of A'ali'i, and the trees could get, right now, I envision that as shrubs, but they could become trees, and they could be very big. And for them to use that particular wood for imu is,
Wow.
I had no idea.
It's
And
rare.
that was an unusual comment
Yeah.
that they had, because there's no A'ali'i there now. I mean, there's a few that are growing out
Right.
in
A few
the,
bushes, but
few bushes,
none tree length. Yeah.
so a lot of the environmental face has been changed by the training, the fires, and the presence of humans, other than Hawaiians.
They had wells and springs, I understand.
Yes, they did. We know of a famous spring, famous because Marion Kelly wrote a wonderful monograph in 1976. She was working for the Bishop Museum. She had been hired by the Army, and when she interviewed a lot of people, one of them was Ivanhoe Naivi, who was born in Makua Valley. And she shows him dipping his hand in that spring. It's a beautiful picture. But the Army didn't like the message there. And it took until, about 3-4 years ago when finally one of the colonels... We discovered it, and we asked the colonels, you know, there's one colonel in particular who read it and said, you know, I don't see anything wrong with this, and they went ahead. I'm not saying they published it, but at least they made discs of it, and you can write to the Army PAO office, Public Information Office. And if you're interested, it's an excellent 2-volume set.
There were other documents I've seen from the Board of Water Supply way back when they did a survey of the valley, and they had 25 wells in the valley, and most of them were spring. Some of them were brackish, but there were several that they called sweet water. So the one well that Fred's talking about is one of those. Uncle Ivanhoe, as well as Walter Kamana, talked about that.
Yeah.
And the reason why it wasn't visible to us at the time, they had bulldozed the roads, and a lot of that debris had been pushed up and into that one, several springs. So over a period of time since we've been able to access, we've been able to find some of these springs and wells, and hopefully we'll be able to get them cleaned up and make them useful again.
The water is so important.
Oh, very
them.
important, yes.
So there was a thriving community in Makua.
Yes.
Okay. Any further thoughts on that? I'm going to ask about when did the military
Right.
come in?
Let me
But-
follow.
Uh-huh.
Let me follow that up with the fact that these bulldozed areas that revealed the Emu Springs, Emu Rings, needed to be protected because they were right in the center of where the Army did much of its training. And so we urged them to do that, and then the sandbags they put in had things growing out of it, it wasn't working, and so on. So Malama Makua volunteered to replace those protections, and we have a slide. We have a slide for that.
Okay.
So you can see a group of students, and one of our mentors, one of our kupuna, Po'onui Lopez, was there, and we were able to replace some of these. They were falling apart. Some of these things were not working as they should. So we replaced the sandbags at that time, and I think now they're using either boards or metal covers to protect this is a very important archaeological and scientific finding, those Emu rings. I just wanted to bring that out.
Okay. So when did the military enter the picture, roughly, or?
Late 20s, you said,
The
Sparky.
late 20s
Like
is when
maybe-
they started using Makua either for shore bombardment, amphibious landings, or in training. But at the time, there were residents there, farmers as well as some of the Kuleana landowners. So what's interesting, I know we're going back and forth in time
That's okay.
here. The Kuleana landowners that were there, not only lived there, but Uncle Walter Kamena's, the mango tree that's there, sort of burnt out from the last several fires, but his grandparents lived there, and that's where he grew up. So he would say, he shared that in the middle of the night, they'd be sleeping, and all of a sudden, from the ocean, there'd be bombarding Makua, and they'd have to run and hide under the bridge with their blankets until it stopped. And they didn't know when it was going to start, when it was going to end. So this is the kind of environment that they lived under, constant attack almost.
Right.
And
So they were shooting from the ocean into the valley?
yes,
Yeah, and I think they did most of that during World War II, but it certainly may have occurred earlier, and we do have pictures of landings occurring in at least the 30s. And I know that some of those places that the Army bought into, they actually bought fee simple, I've heard 1929 used, were for gun emplacements that I assume were aimed out towards the ocean, because some members of the military expected an attack at some time. But we don't know if that was ever fired. We haven't been able to
probably
find
not.
out. Yeah.
So there was military action going on even though people were still living there.
Yeah.
And so,
And Waianae has played a huge role in the military training. There's stories of what's going on where military, the rest camp is right now, and how they got it, because that was Neneu Beach, and it was a Hawaiian village, fishing village. And they took it over during World War II when it was
right,
martial law, and they never gave it back.
right, they still have it.
Yeah.
They still have
Right.
it. So there's a lot of that on Oahu, as well as throughout the state. But Waianae specifically, and I think at the Waianae Library, I've seen photos of a tank caravan that's going down Barrington, heading to Makua for live fire training, along with thousands, and I think they had maybe 50,000 people on the site.
Yeah,
Troop station for a while.
but don't you think that the main reason for martial law and taking over that whole area of Makua Cave to Kaena Point was due to Pearl Harbor?
Well,
This
that-
is
Yeah,
obviously
it-
response to
It
Pearl
went up
Harbor.
to,
sure.
this is before, and then when so this had been going on before Pearl Harbor though, and then Pearl Harbor occurred.
Well, it certainly made a huge land takeover for the Army. And when they did, you've got to give the territorial government some credit here. They said, okay, take, you can, it's a war effort, we've been attacked, et cetera, national security. And at that time, it was a real threat. So they said, yes, you can take over Makua, but they had an agreement that Makua would be returned 6 months after the war's end, at least in a state that would be acceptable to then government. And as Barkey has said, that never happened. They just kept it. And interestingly enough, the territorial government sued the military afterwards. And the story I have is that when we became a state, 1959, the feds said, look, you've got to solve this issue, this conflict. So there was an agreement that Makua, at least the bottom 1/3, would be leased to the military until 2029. That happened in '64. It was for 65 years. I'm sorry, 1964 for 65 years. It goes on till 2029 for a total. That's 65 years for a total of $1. $1.
Yeah, penny a year.
That's it's a pretty good real estate deal the military got.
And
But they didn't keep their promise to return it.
well, going back to the martial law, they took control of all lands.
So that was after Pearl Harbor though.
Yes,
Yeah.
after Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
And then when
So 41.
the people of Hawaii was forced into voting for statehood, and it was the vote that you didn't have a choice between free association, independence, or statehood. It was, you have a choice between statehood or nothing at all. So at the time, Governor Quinn was an appointed governor from the president. So basically the legislature, although we had constitutional government, didn't have the power to make laws. It could be all vetoed by the governor and nothing would happen. So they wanted some control over government, over the laws of the islands. So people voted for statehood. A lot of Hawaiians didn't, and I talked to a lot of the kupuna that said we didn't because that was wrong. And it was still a territory of Hawaii that was overthrown.
Right.
So there's all of this history that goes along with that.
Yeah.
Right.
And the army, the military, had to resolve the land issues. So they said, we're going to keep this. This goes to the state. And that's when the state said, release it back. In the lease, it says that all they have to do is bury their waste. So as we were talking the OBOD site, one of the things that came up for me, how I got involved, was partly because, well, what are they burying?
Right.
And what does
Their
that
waste.
mean? And as we started finding out and asking questions, more and more information started to reveal itself.
But now, at that, when Pearl Harbor happened, well, people had been living in the valley
Yes.
at that prior, but
Yes.
then Pearl Harbor happened, so then they were evicted or
Yes, evicted.
asked to leave or,
Well, forced to leave.
Yeah, and some of the stories is that you'd have 3 or 4 men come in, half with rifles, the other half saying, here's $100, get going, for some, and others get going.
Yeah.
So Uncle Walter, I think, was saying that, as well as Naivi, Ivanhoe Naivi,
Yeah.
they were waiting for their land to come back after the war was
Yes.
over,
right.
and
Never did.
never did.
And they were supposedly they could sue for compensation, but from the records that I've looked at, the only ones that I saw got compensated were the big ranchers. McCandless,
Yep.
Lincoln McCandless was compensated. He didn't think it was enough, but I don't know that anybody got even $100.
No.
Not that my knowledge.
So everybody was asked to leave and
Were
the
forced-
valley was cleared.
Yeah, forced to leave.
Right, forced to
Right.
leave.
Right.
And what's interesting, when I went to Vieques, Puerto Rico,
Right.
they had a live fire training area, and the Navy was the one that occupied that. And it was interesting, a similar thing happened there, that the people that were residents were forced out of their homes and their homes bulldozed or used for target practice. And in Makua, the residents, or the homes that were left after everyone was evicted, were used as target practice.
I heard about the
Yeah,
church
the
being
church. Yeah, that is one of the
marked
stories I
as a
heard.
target.
Yeah, was a big cross was put on the roof
Right.
and it was shelled or
Everything was
bombed.
shelled and-
Yeah.
Well, even
Destroyed.
today, in that, on the gravestones at that cemetery, there are bullet holes in them.
Yeah.
You can see where the rounds.
So
as
even
they
the
did
cemeteries got
Yeah.
shafted.
Well, when the military uses the environment in their training. So as they did their amphibious landings, they landed and they attacked through the cemetery, and they were firing live rounds and proceeding up into the valley. So the bullets, the first shot that was ever fired by a military training is still in Makua, deteriorating, becoming part of our environment, our water, our food, our air.
Well said. Well said.
That's really sad.
Yeah.
Were there any folks that did not want to leave
Mhm.
or
Yeah, I'd heard that
Gave
some
them a
tried
hard
to come
time.
back, and one of the things, I don't know if it was Uncle Walter Kamana or one of the kupunas had said that one of the ways to keep people from coming back at night or whatever, or hiding in the valley, was to either seal, cover, or fill in the wells. And I heard that there were like 18 of those wells where, and the big one where McCandless had his Sweetwater well near the front of the valley was filled in with, as you and I know, all kinds of junk, because we actually went in there and dug down to around 10 feet, and there was all kinds of stuff, barbed wire, iron poles, logs, and even a layer of asphalt we dug out. And You can see what's left there.
Right. So, when did Malama Makua form? I know there's some discussion about exactly, but roughly when did it start, and why? You know, if
Well, my history, and we come from different
right,
parts of.
that's the interesting thing.
From Makua. So my history comes from the fact that I was working with the homeless population back then. And it seemed that before the time I was involved, every 10 years, it seemed like there was a mass eviction of the people that migrated out there. And what I found is that Makua was a healing place. People would go there to die and really end up getting better. And it was a place that they could meditate and relax and heal spiritually, pretty much. And during that time, I found that the evictions were actually caused because the military wanted to do amphibious landings. So, but they needed to clear the beach of all these homeless people, and I was part of that group.
I see. Interesting.
So that's what got me interested. So one of the things we talked about in our community meetings, there were like 60 people or 60 families and a couple, 300
Right.
people there, is how do we prevent this? We don't know if it's going to happen, but how do we organize ourselves and how do we make it so that we're not looked upon in a negative way and criminalized, because this is a situation where some of us as Hawaiians, this is traditional lifestyle.
Right.
Malka, Makai, and the Makai lifestyle and that healing process and hiuvai was part of that cultural component that we discussed and started learning from being there.
Right.
But I ended up being on the governor's task force and having to deal with the bureaucracy. Their intention was not to resolve the problem. It was to create a situation to force the eviction, which he eventually did. So that was one of the things. And what ended up getting me to meet with Fred was one of the discussions the Army had with the open burn and open detonation area.
Right.
And that burial and that contamination that goes along with that. So
Yeah.
I'll stop there and
Well,
let you get caught up.
Yeah, this is really interesting because I used to visit the so-called homeless, houseless people on the beach, and in fact was there when what's his name, the photographer,
Ed Greavy.
Ed Greavy came and took a picture of a whole bunch of us.
Yeah.
But Sparky actually lived there with his wife Leandra, and the way I got involved in this was through a friend by the name of Stuart Meacham, who was reading the newspaper one day, and I don't read too many of these little announcements, but there was an announcement by the EPA saying they were about to grant the Army permission to continue using the open burn, open detonation site. So anybody wondering what OBOD stands for? Open burn, open detonation. Yeah. And they use that to get rid of munitions that were either outdated or so defective or they just didn't want anymore. And Pat Tummins of Environment Hawaii did a wonderful study. I think it's dated 1994. It could be a year or two before. But in any way, she found out through her research that there were chemicals from the University of Hawaii, such as picric acid, highly toxic, highly explosive chemical. There were medical wastes from Tripler taken to this site to be burned, and they'd dig up a pit, they'd throw it in there, throw either gas or diesel or some maybe wood, and they would set it on fire or explode it actually. And so when we got into this and we got the community involved in this thing, we contacted EPA and let them know that no, the study needed to be done. There was contamination, which Sparky spoke of earlier. There's all kinds of stuff. There's cancer-causing chemicals. There's heavy metals.
Was there also used weapons that the military had used? And we're trying to dispose
munitions,
of?
munitions, certainly, yes. Munitions were part of it.
What would be some of the munitions that they used?
Well, you know, munitions, like a lot of things, have a date, and they get old. And so if they're not used, they are exploded. One incredible, crazy, I think crazy, example of this was what they call improved conventional munitions.
Yeah.
It's a euphemism for cluster bombs. You know, those are those horrible things. They're usually shot from cannon or dropped by planes, and anybody can pick it up. It can be a soldier, yes, but it could be a child, it could be a farmer, and like there are 90 million of them dropped in Laos, for instance, and maybe half of them are still there. But they actually blew them up. They wanted to destroy a bunch of these, and they blew them up in that OBOD site that's in the slide, and it scattered many of them. I mean, it destroyed some, but it scattered them.
Yeah.
And I know that my son, when he was helping to clean up that area after a burn, which we'll get to later, said that you know, they were told, no, leave those alone because they're still hot.
And range rules, in the military they have what is called range rules. And the range rules state that you can use any weapon in a live fire range as long as you don't touch it. So as long as it was used for its intended purpose, it's not considered a hazardous waste. The other part is that cluster bombs or anti-personnel mines, which is what it is.
Yes.
Because if you bump it, you kick it, it blows off your leg.
Oh.
And the idea of that is that now, rather than having one person, you've got 3 or 4 people that have to care for that one person wounded in the battlefield. So that takes people out of the equation. So it's illegal to use those on a live fire range where troops are, except they did it in the OBOD site. So when it was blown out of the protected area, it is now they ended up fencing off sections where the ICMs are.
Yeah, it's off limits.
Off limits. But even where Vince was finding them,
it was blown away.
It was beyond the live fire training area where the troops always migrate through.
Yeah.
I heard that napalm also was
yes. I think they used just about everything. Yeah.
As well as, I think, mustard gas.
All kinds of stuff.
You know,
there's stuff dumped in the ocean, but there are also things disposed of.
That's true. That's another one.
So
we've never been able to find official records, except
of what was
Pat
put in
Cummins had found.
There was that one major says, "Oh well, we don't have any records
of the OBOD."
Of anything. Yeah, but based on her calculation, it seemed like they were disposing of about 50 tons per year. I think it was. So huge amounts of materials.
And then also the transporting of it from wherever it came from through YNI.
Yeah. It's all
the scary part with that is that each vehicle has a 1,500 meter blast radius. So every time they came in with munitions, it passed through every school, every residence, every business on our coast as it went from wherever to Makua. And so even the munitions that come into Lulu'ule now, I mean, they still expose our community to catastrophe. And there's no evacuation plan for us. There's just send the body bags.
That's something. So so this is the start of Malama Makua, but is there sort of a date or a year?
Yeah. We had some members of the press were interested in our efforts to have the EPA force the Army to do a NEPA, that's a National Environmental Protection Act statement. And they started working on what was probably going to be an EA. And they did have one study done by Halliburton, of all companies. And although even the Army people have told me, some of them, that it was a terrible study, really junk, it still showed there was contamination from cadmium, arsenic, lead, other heavy metals, certain cancer-causing substances, and so on. they definitely showed up in higher amounts.
And this is the OBOD?
This is a study of the OBOD
Okay.
site. That site is actually a 4-acre area surrounded by a 14-acre buffer zone. So it's a total of 18 acres that by law came under the jurisdiction of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. And it's the only part, the rest of the over 4,000 acres of Makua is still, you know, Army controlled. And that's where 95% of the contamination comes from their history of training.
Yeah.
And only about 5% came from the OBOD site. But still, it was important that they do a study there. Well, they started the study around 92, end of 92, and in 1994 they said, well, we're not going to complete the study, we're going to close the site. So they closed the OBOD site, and I guess a small detachment that was attached to it, and I understand they shipped it to the continent. And that was somewhat suspicious for us. Why didn't you complete the study? You had
Yeah,
wanted
why
to
didn't they
do?
release the information of what they found?
They only released the Halliburton study. It's interesting, but they must have had some other studies.
Yeah, but that was the finding was no significant impact?
Well, they never finished it at that time,
But
to my knowledge. You know,
Is that when Malama Makua?
there was a press thing, and somebody, what I heard, asked our friend Gigi Kokio from Makaha Farm, what do you guys call yourself? He was part of our group. And he just said, oh, we're Malama Makua. And it's the same name that Sparky and his group had come up with.
Yeah.
So Malama Makua was in by 94.
Oh, great. Okay. So, and then, so did the OBOD study, so it never got published or it never got completed?
No, it actually
So-
did get published, but it didn't result in a published environmental statement. You know, it didn't, they decided to close OBOD
close it,
site, so
okay.
it didn't have to issue anything. That's all it's been questionable.
So, as we, you know, even Auntie Frenchie mentioned that for the last 25 years before that study, she was trying to get them to do an EIS, Environmental Impact
Yes.
Statement. And they did EAs, environmental assessment,
Yes.
that came up with, well, we're not, you know, we're doing live fire training and, you know, there's no significant impact. So it just was an indication that they kept pushing the line and
Right.
making it so they didn't have to identify the poisons or the constituents that
Right.
may end up affecting us.
You know, there's an interesting, if I can add to that. In 1976, I was able to dig up an EA, an environmental assessment that they did. It's signed by the colonel and people who had done it and so on. And they did say there was a significant impact and that the Army needed to do an EIS. It's
Yeah.
the only time I've ever heard the Army do it that way. It was incredible. But did they do the EIS?
No.
Not until very recently. Not
And we had to
forced.
take them to court to do
Yeah,
that.
we had to. Right.
So,
But let me go back
okay,
to the OBOD
go ahead,
site.
go ahead.
Some of the hunters that would go and hunt in Makua before even the fences went up, they said that the Army or the Navy or any military could go there, dig a hole, and dump things. So although the OBOD site is the identified location of that type of activity, there were sites throughout the valley.
Oh.
And we don't know
Yes.
because they never kept records.
No, I've heard the same thing, right? And you just can't find the records at all, even in terms of depleted uranium,
Yeah.
if it was ever used in the valley. Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
Well, there was one question that I asked that kind of raised eyebrows, and there was one incident at Pearl Harbor where one of the nuclear subs went nuclear and they flooded it. And our question was that, okay, what did you guys do with all the water? Did you dump that at Makua as well? And so we even had
Interesting.
one of our people take a Geiger counter
Oh, yeah.
inside, and that was stopped really quick. So we really don't know.
Yeah, we
Right.
don't know.
But they said no, we didn't. But my problem with their responses has always been, no, there's no impact, there's nothing there. And the more we search and the more we find, the more that no becomes more like a lie.
Yeah,
rather than honest information.
They certainly said so about Schofield, yeah, and yet depleted uranium was eventually found.
And chemical weapons that were used in training. And with us as downwinders, we were being impacted as a population downwind.
Right.
Yeah.
So when did the lawsuit start, or what set it off?
Yeah.
Can you give us some background?
Okay. After the OBOD site was closed by the Army, but we knew that 95% of the contamination and Opala and so on came from training, which they continued to do. We got together with Earth Justice, the law firm for the environment. And we were very fortunate to be assigned one of their very best lawyers, David Henkin, who studied the issue, has written a very interesting report, and that report can be accessed at
earthjustice.org.
Earth Justice.
Yeah, it's a transcripts, but also his an audio file that you can listen to and read through the transcript as
a very good history of the legal part. But we did get we did sign a contract and so on, and they represented us. We hired them, and so in 1998, September, he sued the Army, and as it happened at about the same time, there was this fire in Makua, one of many, but it was one of the larger ones, 800 acres, I believe you said. And the Army decided to hold off on training and respond to this lawsuit. Part of that lawsuit was that they needed to do a NEPA statement, an environmental statement, and seeing as it seemed obvious to us that there was contamination, they should just save money and go ahead and do an EIS. But no, they did an EA, an environmental assessment, and that's when they came out with the FONSI. FONSI means findings of no significant impact, which on the face of it seemed ridiculous. And so Earth Justice and Malama Makua took them to court, because that was just incredible that they would pull this. I know in 2000, I think it was 2001 January, we had this huge meeting with the community at our district park, where over 100 people gave testimony. And
we went to 2 in the morning.
Yes, it went to 2, and we remember that. It was late. There was a lot of community interest and so on, and 99% of it was for them to do that EIS. And but in any case, it went before Federal Judge Mulway, and in June, she said, there's a lot of information here, and I'm going to need time to study it. So I'll be back in October of 2001 to rule on this. As I recall, that was the date. And then
before you go on,
sure,
because there's a big event that happened.
Yes, it's a huge event.
I was going to event.
Yeah, I want to back up a little bit.
You want to back up before we get to this big event?
How we converged is that when I first started my research, because of the homeless issue in Makua, I went and set up an appointment with Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund. And that was the predecessor of Earth Justice.
Yes.
So when I talked to them, I said, well, we need help, because this is an issue, and it's a cultural issue. There's things that are going on. And they said, well, we take care of endangered species. It's plants and animals. And I told them, yeah, but the Hawaiians are endangered species. No, it's not people, it's animals, it's plants. So after leaving and thinking about it, all of the endangered species of Makua were the voiceless Hawaiians that couldn't speak, and they needed to be defended. So as we started talking about it, there were over 250 fires in Makua from training and people just, flipping cigarettes or whatever. So there were multiple causes, but every time they trained, there was a fire. And so this lawsuit, actually it started out as a letter, and the Earth Justice picked it up. We started working with them. He sent a letter to the Army saying that you need to do something about the fires. And I guess it was 2 weeks after they received the letter, the Marines went in to train. Yeah. They lobbed the mortar outside the fire break road and burnt all the way into an area that had the haha. Yeah. And this is there were 4 plants remaining. Yeah. There's Sienna superba, and they're gone now. But between the time that we got involved and now the military, the environmental department took seeds and did a lot of outplanting. So it's not an extinct species yet. It's but they succeeded in being able to do outplanting and propagation. So they've done a really good job in that part of it, in saving it. But I wanted to bring that part up.
But they're sort of pushed to.
That's interesting, and I agree with you that the biologists the civilians working with the Army are doing a wonderful job, and that the Cyanea superba, the 4 that they discovered, eventually died, and but they were able to recover seeds and so on. So it's extinct in the valley, but they have outplanted it. But it's interesting that Earth Justice itself seems to have changed a little bit in that that they want the cultural aspect of it.
I think
is
we
part
helped.
of it. I think so. I think we helped.
Getting that to be incorporated.
I think so. There was
no, I think so. I think that they've gotten more sensitive to what you originally had suggested.
In law as well, the justice system, the judges are being more open to not being so limited, and maybe it's just evolved that way. But before it was plants and animals, and we had no place there at the table for a cultural experience. And I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm a cultural practitioner, but I want to learn. I want to be exposed to it, and we didn't have that opportunity there.
That's one thing we've learned a lot, haven't we?
We have.
But I think, like you said, they've learned.
And they've learned too, and they've come along, right?
Yeah, like you said, they've included the people as endangered and the whole system of life.
And
it's all interconnected.
They included some of the very important alelo, like the Hi'iaka sagas that involve Makua, and that's part of that EIS actually. But the big event. Are we ready event?
Yes, we're ready for the big
as
event.
people who are listening may remember,
this was 2001.
2001. So in September 11th, 2001, of course, we had that horrendous attack, and so all bets were off on the Army doing anything because national security, we were threatened, and so on, and under the laws, they could just come in and train, and period. So we had a lot of soul searching to do ourselves in Malama Makua, because none of us wanted to see the Army resume training. They had not trained since '98. It had been 3 years. And the Army wanted to train, but using that as a reason for them to negotiate. We were able to reach, it was painful, but we were able to reach a settlement agreement. I believe you remember all those meetings we had and everything.
Morning hours.
Yeah, and it, we weren't happy with it, but at least we were able to limit their training from what it had been before. It wasn't just you could come in any time and do 100, 200 days a year of training or more. It was limited to what we call CALFEXs. It's a 5-day training cycle, of which 1 day is live fire and very destructive. But they were given a total, if I recall correctly, of about 36 over 3 years.
Yeah.
And out of those 36, they only completed 27. It's kind of interesting. They didn't even do all that they could. And we'll come to that in a minute. Because we got in return, and we should show that poster, the slide of the poster that has
Settlement agreement?
terms, the settlement agreement, the terms of the settlement agreement. Sure, they did get limited live fire training, which they wanted, but we were able to get observer status of those, that one or more members or people we chose from the community could observe live fire training. That was one, and then we had some interesting experiences up on that tower. There's a tower in Makua. As you drive by, you can see it.
Well, we're banned from their operation building now because we were in the building when they gave orders that should not have been given.
It was very interesting, and I myself am particularly impressed how inaccurate those mortars are.
Yes.
And how often they didn't land in the impact area where they're supposed to. They would either be short or they go far. Sometimes they ran into the center ridge, which is quite far, and we were there to observe it and keep them on track. So it was very useful.
Well, part of that agreement was also they set up a fire plan, and part of that was to identify the days that they should not train.
That's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the one I was talking about where the order was given to fire, the fire chief says, we're getting right to the point where we need to stop firing. Everybody was in place, and the captain that was in charge says, fire now.
Yeah.
Because it was that close, but it wasn't there yet. You know, like it was 10 seconds away from. That's because the agreement, once they start training,
they definitely fudged in favor of training.
So it was interesting how they seen the agreement as a way to renegotiate all the time.
Right.
And that was just one of the things that learned. After that, we were banned from the building.
Well, yeah, but I think we had an effect on that. You know, they had the three colors. They had green color, which means that usually when it was raining, it was green, because the danger of fires during rain is none, practically. And so, you know, if everything was, if the humidity was high, it wasn't dry, or there was raining or whatever, they went ahead and trained. That is green. Yellow is caution. Things are drying out a bit, you know, you're supposed to take extra precautions. And then if it turns to red, which it usually was in the summer month, when things were tinder dry, they couldn't train. That's why they couldn't do their whole 36 that they were allowed to. But at least those conditions, and a lot of that resulted from the Fish and Wildlife saying, hey, you've got to do a better job of taking care of the endangered species that are in the valley. So they had to.
There was something Fish and Wildlife that I got to mention. Within the service, they don't need to get any community cultural practitioner input.
Oh.
So they have their professionals and they make decisions. So we don't have a say in any of that. So when they're talking about saving endangered species, they can go ahead and destroy an environment to a point where it's just about gone. And then they'll say, okay, stop and let it recover. And so this slow choke on the environment. And if you were to watch the movie Hawaii,
I didn't see it, but
Makua is in the background.
Yes.
And the beach is in the background, and the stream is in the background as this movie is going on, and the trees are 60 feet tall.
wow.
None of that exists anymore.
And there are trees.
Yeah, and that was
You
in the
don't see that.
60s.
Yeah.
So from then to now, all of that the
That's
entire
right.
environment has been changed.
Yep. And Earth Justice did a Freedom of Information request regarding, from the Army, the number of fires over a 10-year period between 1989 to 1998, when the other big fire occurred. And there were 272 fires, large and small. But if you average that out, that's 27 a year. That's over 2 a month.
Yeah.
That's a lot of fires. And I used to go out there and photograph those fires. And I know you
And that's
take
a lot
video.
of animals and plants that die.
Oh, of course. Some of them were really big.
If you look at it now, it's a lot of fountain grass or molasses grass, and we don't really see the endangered species or the natives there. And as we started learning, we found that there was a scientist at the University of Hawaii that was doing the snail study. And let's see what, Achatenella?
Achatenella.
It's a small multicolored snail. It takes 7 years for it to reach maturity to reproduce. And these snails basically, what we knew at the time is that they would live on one tree. So all of their ancestors was the shells below the tree. Since then we found that they do travel. But they also, on Oahu, sometimes each ahupua'a or each valley has their own variety. They're all related, but they're different color, different size.
Yes, fascinating. Yeah.
And what was happening is that these fires would burn all the way through their habitat, which is on the top of the mountain.
Oh.
And since then, you know, that more populations have been found and isolated by the environmental group in the Army, that they've been able to, I think, do a much better job in saving and protecting them.
Yes. The Achatenella tree snails are just beautiful. They've been described as bejeweled. And slides number 12 and 13, I believe, we'll show that. But we'll show that later on. It's not, you're ahead of me. It's all right. You know, but the things that we did get from that, we started with observer status. We also got access, cultural access, 2 a month plus 2 overnights a year for the makahiki, opening and closing. And we have a slide for one of the accesses that shows a beautiful picture of the valley with one of our groups that had been coming to the valley, and it's a doctor friend of mine who carries the Hawaiian flag. And
that looks like the Koiahi side looking down towards Kaena.
Yeah, you got it. You got it. Yeah. And the makahiki that's there, we have the next slide, shows a beautiful black and white picture by a dear friend of ours, Jan Beckett. And we can show this by permission. And it shows the group with the makahiki group. I think it's really good.
Now Uncle Walter Kamana said that when he was a child, he remembers makahiki being held in Makua.
It's amazing.
So this is reenactment. We're learning. We have a kumuhula, and there are several people that have really taken the lead in this. And
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
So one of the other things that isn't part of the agreement, which we can come back to later, but which we've been doing, and it's our 16th annual Makua sunrise. It happens to occur on Easter morning. It is non-denominational. It's a ceremony and a celebration that's run by the people there. And as I say, we're going to have our 16th one on April the 8th, and this is probably not going to get out in time for that. But every year on Easter, you're invited to our, it starts at 6 a.m. to our Makua, we call it Makua sunrise. So these are some of the things that have resulted, you might say.
This is on top of the 2
it's an addition.
visits per month, cultural access.
Yes, it's an addition.
Could go from sunrise to sunset.
It could. We have been doing some afternoon ones, but mostly we start when it's cooler in the morning, and we have some really beautiful accesses. And we're getting more. It's slow coming, but the Army's opening up more. They're supposed to, by court order, give us more sites.
So how many years have the cultural accesses?
That's a good question.
Is it about?
You remember when we started?
The year after we came up with, once they finished the live fire training,
200.
there was a blended time when they didn't train. That's when we would go in. So
well, yeah, actually
2001.
We started on 2000 to open to the public. We actually started late 2001, where I remember, I don't know if you were with us, but I know Leandra, your wife, was, and some other people.
So 10 years.
And so it's been 2002, 10, it's
years.
now over 10 years that we've been doing these cultural accesses. So we've done well over 100 of them, and thousands of people have been able to go through the valley, and you know, because that's
And
the best.
If I wanted to go, what do I have to do? Call you?
Call me. I've been assigned. I'm the coordinator. Generally speaking, your wife helps a great deal on the accesses, but and sometimes I'm not here, and my son coordinates. But yeah, call me, and the number will be.
It'll be posted.
It'll be on the screen.
Now the key this is all from the settlement agreement.
Settlement
but one of the
agreement.
key pieces I thought was the requirement for the EIS.
Yes.
Can you?
It was. It's probably
that
should be number 1 on the list. It required the long sought after EIS from the Army.
By what year?
But we gave them 3 years.
3 years, okay.
You know, it was negotiated to be 3 years, more than enough time to do even a complex, but it should have been thorough, and it should have only taken 3 years. So what happened?
Well,
Didn't.
So just to summarize that last piece,
Sure.
this comes from the settlement agreement
Yes.
that came out of the lawsuit, and it was sort of triggered by the September 11 event where
Yes.
there had to be some quick negotiations
Yes.
because of the
Yes.
so-called national security
Mhm.
issue.
Mhm.
But it looks like some really good stuff came out of it.
Yeah,
Well,
we got some.
Look
good
like we're
stuff.
running out of time.
Yeah.
So maybe we can cover the agreement, a little bit of the history, and kind of going around the circle again, and in the
Okay.
next segment, if
Okay,
that's possible.
that'll be fine. Thanks very much.
you're welcome.
I think we're running out of time, and I want to thank you again for being here. And
You're
I think
welcome.
this is a historic moment.
We haven't even got to the good
Oh
part
yeah, we
yet.
haven't
Yeah,
gotten there,
yeah.
but we're coming.
But we'll be continuing this.
Yeah, and we'll be continuing this at another time. Thank you
Okay.
very much for.
Aloha.
Yeah, aloha.
Thank you.
Oh, Tutu, tell me where the people going today. Oh, Tutu, tell me where the people going today. They're going down Makua, bring ho kupu and pray. They're going down Makua, bring ho kupu and pray. Oh, Tutu, please, can you tell me how to go? Oh, Tutu, please, can you tell me how to go? Take my hand and follow, this road is long and slow. Take my hand and follow, this road is long and slow. Tutu, when I get there, oh, what gifts shall I bring? Tutu, when I get there, oh, what gifts shall I bring? Come with aloha, I